Hello and welcome to today's video. This one's a little bit different than most of them because before watching the video really you need to watch a movie. The movie is called Made in Dagenham, Dagenham, and I've posted a link to it with subtitles on the notes to this video. So what we've got here is basically my comments about the video and what it covers. Here we go. Firstly, a bit of background. Dagenham is a suburb of London, England, and at the time of the movie, it was the site of the fourth biggest car factory in the world. It employed 55,000 people, which is about as many people as live in Messop. Out of these, only 187 were women. And at that time, women were always paid less than men. It opened in 1931 and has produced over 10.9 million cars and more than 39 million engines in its history. Making cars ended at the plant in 2002, but today it continues to make 1.4 million engines a year. Okay, a little bit of vocabulary. Firstly, overtime. Overtime is time worked above your normal hours. So if you normally work 8 hours per day, hour 9 and above would be overtime. Overtime pay is usually higher than normal pay. Companies ask employees to work overtime when they need to make more in their factory, but they don't want to employ more people, especially when the need is for a short time. Job prospects. This means the chances of promotion at work to a more important and better paid job. And motive, or motives, plural, is the reason for doing something. Civil servants. These are people who work for the government. Each ministry, like the Ministry of Immigration or the Ministry of Labour, will have civil servants working there. Part of their role is to provide continuity. Politicians come and go as the party in power changes, but the civil servants work with both parties, giving unbiased advice. They are also usually more expert than the politicians because ministers can be moved from one ministry to another from time to time. So what's the story of the movie? A few months before the start of the movie, the women's jobs had been changed from skilled to unskilled, and that meant they would get less pay. They had told the management, the bosses, that they wanted this corrected, and if it wasn't, they would stop working overtime and have a one-day strike to show that they were serious. At the start of the film, the management have done nothing, so they vote to have a one-day strike. Before the day of the strike, the management asked for a meeting with them. At the meeting, the union man tries to reach an agreement with the management which will make them all look good. But the women disagreed and said they would go ahead with the one-day strike and the overtime ban. After the meeting, the management sent a letter to each of the women telling them they have not followed the right process and is worded very aggressively. The union people want to ignore it because, quote, it's what they always do after a meeting. It doesn't mean anything, unquote. The women don't agree and they vote for a complete strike, not just one day, and happen immediately. Albert tells Rita that the issue isn't just about skilled versus unskilled. It's about equal pay for women. She finds out that he cares a lot about this, in spite of being a man, because when he was a boy, his father wasn't around, and it was hard for his mother to get enough money for the family, Albert and his brothers, because she was paid less. Ford cars are selling very well, so it's not long before all the seat covers the women have made are used. This causes a problem because the women are not making any more. So the factory has a lot of cars that are nearly ready, but are just waiting for the seats. The management decide to close the whole factory. All 55,000 workers have no jobs until the women go back to work. Most of the male workers have supported the women's strike until now, but their support disappears when they have to stop work themselves, even though the women have often had to stop work because of the men in the past. Ford USA gets involved. The management in Britain has to contact the company's owners, Ford head office in the USA, as things get more serious and no cars are being made. This will have financial effects on Ford profits. Ford USA are more ruthless than the UK management. They collect information about the people involved to use against them. But they can't understand Rita because she has not been involved in union business before. They correctly work out that the union negotiator just wants a nice lifestyle, going to good restaurants, traveling around the country, and so on. They look at the wider possible results of the strike, especially equal pay for women. They have factories in over 20 countries. If they give the women in one factory equal pay, they may have to do the same for the other ones. So it would cost them a lot more money than just paying the striking workers more in Britain. Their attitude to the negotiations is very aggressive. They are not interested in who is right or wrong, they just want to win. The head of Ford in the USA phones the British Prime Minister and threatens that if the government supports equal pay, Ford may move its British factory to another country. This would make the government look very bad because 55,000 jobs would be lost and a lot of money for Britain from selling cars to other countries would be lost. This would probably mean the government would lose the next election to another political party who would argue that the present government is looking after the economy very badly. The government gets involved. The government doesn't usually get involved in factory disputes. They let the workers and the managers sort it out on their own. But they feel they have to do something because the British economy is hurting, and this is a very big strike. The strike starts to hurt. Husbands and wives start to argue. Rita's fridge is taken away because they have not been able to keep up the payments on the money they borrowed to get it. Rita's role as one of the strike leaders causes conflicts. She struggles to complete her normal roles of looking after the children and cooking for the family. Her husband supports her and helps, but he doesn't really understand the issues. Connie also has conflicts. Her husband still has some metal in his head from when he was a pilot in World War II and was shot down. The hospital can't get it out because it's near his brain. His health is getting worse fast and she wants to be at home to help him. But the strike means she has to go to more meetings. Eventually he hangs himself while she is away at a meeting. And after that, she feels guilty and more of the leadership of the strike goes to Rita. The British economy is starting to hurt because cars are not being made or sold to other countries during the strike. Ford is starting to hurt. It can't make profits if no cars are made. Ford management in both Britain and the USA are looking bad because they haven't ended the strike. Their personal job prospects are getting worse. So here's a list of some of the different parties with different motives that are involved in the strike. Firstly, obviously, the strikers' family, the union, Ford in Britain and Ford in the USA, the British government, the political party in power in Britain, the personal careers of the Ford managers in the UK and the USA, British politicians, the Minister of Labour, the Prime Minister, the opposition party politicians who can use the strike to attack their government, trade union leaders, trade unions in other industries, because equal pay is just as big an issue for them. and women generally. Equal pay is an issue for all women and other countries. If Britain agrees equal pay, what will other countries do? Will they also agree to equal pay? If they don't agree to equal pay, they will be able to make things cheaper than Britain and sell them at a lower price and take customers away from Britain. The story continues. The strikers are invited to meet the Minister of Labour. The British government doesn't want to upset the Americans generally because they have already upset them on a number of other issues. The government negotiates with Ford for the women. The government decides to pass laws about making all employers pay equal pay for women. And now the ending. Firstly, Ford agreed to what the women want. Their jobs go back to being treated as semi-skilled. Secondly, they get an immediate pay rise which will take them up to 92% of the men's rate. But it will soon go up again because men and women will have to get equal pay for equal work after the government passes the equal pay law. So now we're going to look at some of the issues. Why were women paid less? Men were seen as the breadwinners, the person who got the money for the family. Every family needed a breadwinner to survive. Having two breadwinners, a man and a woman, in a family was seen as a luxury to let the family buy a few extra nice things. Even people who supported fair wages thought it was okay to pay women less. They thought it was unfair for women to take jobs if there were men who didn't have jobs. This meant that some families would have two breadwinners and some would have none, which they thought was unfair. They were not mean or greedy people, they wanted to be fair, but their idea about what was fair was very different from ours today. Also, think back to the case of Albert. His mother was the only one who was working in the family, the father wasn't around. So, in her case, she was the only breadwinner, but she was getting paid less. So, this argument about men getting more because they're the breadwinners breaks down in that situation. Many jobs were divided into men's jobs and women's jobs. So it was easy to say that women's jobs were less important or less skilled and pay them less. It also meant that men and women didn't often do the same work, so it was less obvious that the women were being paid less for the same work. Now let's look at the role of the union. All the union people were men. In the women's machine shop, Connie was the women's representative, but she had to work through Albert. She couldn't talk direct to the union. The union saw itself as being there for the men, not the women, because most of its members were men, and it thought men's jobs were more important. The union wasn't keen to take up the women's case because they didn't think it was very important, and there were lots of other disputes involving men that they thought were more serious. They thought their job was to support the workers, but they were too friendly with the management. So let's look at some attitudes. One of the themes of the film is women taking charge of situations generally. Before the first meeting with management, the union man tells the women not to try to answer any questions themselves, even if they are asked. He wants them to let him answer instead. When they don't agree with what he is saying at the meeting, they ignore this advice. And then later, the union wants to ignore the letter from the company, but the women disagree and take over running the dispute. Lisa, the wife of one of the managers, is upset because even though she has a very good university degree, he treats her like a servant. She has met Rita when they were complaining about the teacher, and she talks to her about the strike, even though she knows her husband would not want her to. In the government, the Labour minister is a woman, one of very few women ministers. She refuses to be bullied by her civil servants and also stands up to the Prime Minister and in the end makes her own decision about what to do. There are a number of examples of language that would be called sexist or inappropriate, but it was common at that time. Just before the first meeting with management, Albert is looking for another person to join the workers' negotiating team. He says, "We need another man," even though it's clear that he's looking for a woman. The Prime Minister refers to the female Minister of Labour as the best man in my cabinet. On one level, this is a compliment because he is saying she is more effective than any of the others. But today it would be thought inappropriate because it also implies that normally only men can be effective. Okay, let's look at human rights and women's rights generally. Many human rights are already in place in rich countries. Although there may be issues about equality for women still remaining, equal pay laws have been in place for around 50 years. Because they are now seen as a right, it's easy to assume that they will come automatically to poor countries in due course. One of the major messages from the movie is that it was far from easy to get equal pay ideas accepted in rich countries, and women had to fight for what they were entitled to. Just because it was the right thing didn't make it happen automatically. The women at Ford had to fight to get what was already their right. There is not much reason to think it will be different in poor countries. Just because it's now accepted as a human right won't make it happen automatically. There will probably be a big struggle before it happens. Okay, what has this got to do with economics? Well, there are different factors of production. Any business needs to bring together four different things: land, labor, which is the workers, capital, which is the money, and enterprise, which is people who are wanting to create a business. In all companies, there are different opinions between these parties. Landholders want rents or payments for natural resources to be as high as possible. Labor wants wages to be as high as possible. Investors, the providers of capital, want payments to them for use of their money to be as high as possible. Management, which is the enterprise, often wants profit to be kept in the company so it can grow bigger instead of being paid to investors or to labor as higher wages. Normally, there is a balance between these parties, but if one party becomes too powerful, it upsets the balance and the parties may fight. A strike represents a fight between labor on one side versus management and investors on the other. The result is that the company doesn't work well for a while and profits will drop. In the longer term, the results can be good or bad. In the case of Ford, it was good because the imbalance was corrected. But if Ford had won the strike, the imbalance would have been worse, which would have been bad. The movie also gives us some insight into the power of corporations. It shows the power that multinational corporations have compared with the governments of countries. The British economy is one of the most powerful 8 economies in the world. So it's right up there in the Premier League. In spite of that, Ford was able to threaten it with moving its factory to another country. It didn't work this time, but it could have if different people had been involved. If multinationals can do this to the British government, they can do it much more easily to the governments of poor countries like Burma. Multinationals wanted to set up in Burma before the coup for two main reasons. Firstly, Burma's population is around 60 million, and this is expected to be an attractive source of customers in the future. Secondly, to make things in factories in Burma to sell to other countries. This second motive is the one where governments need to be careful. When multinationals are deciding where to build a factory, what are they looking for? Number one thing, cheap labor. Second thing, a stable government and no threat of war. And the third thing, a political setup that is friendly to business in general and foreign businesses in particular. And fourth, and quite important, good, cheap transport to move the products to where they will be sold. Out of these, cheap labor is the most important. There are usually a number of countries which fit conditions 2 and 3. Governments often try to attract foreign businesses by setting up areas where taxes will be lower for the first 5 years or factory buildings are provided rent free. Their motive is usually to provide jobs for unemployed workers. They are betting on the companies staying after the tax or rent free period is over. Okay, light industry. This uses machines that are usually much smaller. It doesn't need specialist buildings. The textile industry is usually a light industry. In the film, the machinist area mainly had just sewing machines and tables. They could easily be moved to another location. The building wasn't even suitable for what they were doing. Factories that only involve assembly of parts, for example, light fittings, are also usually light industries. The skill levels needed. If a factory needs highly skilled workers, it is much harder to relocate than if it needs unskilled workers. In many industries, companies need to train their own skilled workers on the job. They cannot simply recruit school leavers, however well educated they are. To relocate the factory, they would need to train new skilled staff at the new location, which would mean a period when they couldn't make anything and wouldn't make any profits while the new people were trained. So let's look at the balance of men versus women and skilled versus unskilled. Heavy industries tend to employ men rather than women. The work often needs physical strength and may be difficult and dirty, for example, mining and shipbuilding. Light industry often employs a high proportion of women. The location of factories may even be decided by the existence of a large number of women to work there. Heavy industries often need a mix of skilled and unskilled workers, while light industries rely mostly on unskilled workers. So, what multinationals do is this: they are much more careful about the location of heavy industry compared with light industry because it's harder to move if they get things wrong. Light industries are relocated frequently to take advantage of tax breaks, incentives, and cheap labor. So, what do poor countries do? At first, they try to attract any industry they can to find jobs for their people. Over time, they try to improve the skill base of their people so that they can attract better paying industries. India, for example, has been very successful in training in computer skills, so that now other countries find it hard to match the skill base of India, and computer companies are attracted to locate there. In due course, they lose the industries they attracted earlier, as the population is looking for better jobs than those industries can provide. The multinationals also tend to relocate to other countries where labor is cheaper. This table that follows shows the movements in the cheapest source of textiles over time. So if you look at the left-hand column there in the blue one, between 1940s to 1960s, Hong Kong and Singapore were the main source of cheap textiles like t-shirts and jeans. By the end of the 1960s, these countries had moved into other industries like electronics, airports, and tourism. 1960s and 70s, Taiwan took over. They became the cheapest place to make things. Now they're too expensive. 1970s to the 1990s, companies like Nike located factories in Indonesia to make shoes. The government in Indonesia has not been very successful in upskilling But wage rates in China are cheaper and more accessible as China opened up from the mid 1980s.
Mm.